Coming to our first talk. Uh, Hello. Yeah, after earning his bachelor's degree in architecture and civil engineering from Lehigh University, architect Samuel Barclay went on to obtain his master's from the Southern California Institute of Architecture in 2004. He practiced in Los Angeles with Studio Works Architects before moving to India in 2006 to work with Studio Mumbai and further co-founding Case Design in 2013 with his wife Erica Barclay. In addition to his experience in the design and construction of architectural projects, he has worked on furniture, interiors, and on exhibitions. Architect Samuel has founded the brand Case Goods in 2015. May I now invite Samuel sir to give us talk on the title, The Craft of Collaboration.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm going to present my screen. I can do that. I can get Ocean, if you can give me a thumbs up or a yes.
Yes, we can.
Up.
It's visible to us now.
You can see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So thank you for that lovely introduction, and Axel, it's good to see you again, and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in general terms, and a little bit about how that relates to stone and our sort of material research. So I've titled this talk The Craft of Collaboration, and it's sort of an ongoing series that I've been giving. This is tailored more specifically to the task at hand, or the topic at hand. But for us, the idea of collaboration and the idea of engagement with artisans and craftspeople from all different aspects of making is something that we not only enjoy, but we find it as an incredibly meaningful way to practice and to sort of create the projects that we envision, and based on the opportunities that we have. So as many of you know, India is an incredibly rich place. There's in terms of craft and tradition, the way that things are made. But what I've really come to enjoy, I've been living and practicing here the last 15 years, and what I've really come to live and love and enjoy is the nature of engagement and the way that you can work with the people who are creating these things with you. And so what I love about these two images are that the craftsmen, the people who are actually would be the ones producing the work, they're the ones also doing the design in both of these images. These are conversations. On the left is myself working out a window detail. Punram is the carpenter that I'm working with, and he's made this full-scale drawing of a section through a window. We're talking about everything from how the parts would come together to how do you keep water out. On the right is Malika Rama, who's a sort of an all-rounder, but he's got extensive knowledge in bamboo, in stone, building wells, all kinds of different materials and experiences he's had. And for me, again, part of our practice as well is kind of working at a range of different scales. We have large-scale public works that I'll show in a little bit, but we also do everything in between: residential interiors, private residential architecture, exhibitions, and then all the way down to furniture, lights, and objects. Again, part of the joy in this process, we have a very strong workshop culture in our practice. Literally 50% of our studio is kind of normative office spaces. People are working on laptops, making drawings, physical models, but the other 50% is a very active workshop. We produce a lot of the things ourselves, but almost everything that we send out in terms of the furniture and lights that we make comes through that workshop space, even if the parts are coming from other places. But what I enjoy is kind of the immediacy and also the democracy of the pen or the pencil, the idea of a sketch, something that I make, something that one of the craftsmen makes. It's very easy and quick to sort of go through that process, turn that into a full-scale prototype in wood or in plaster, different materials, and then for that to become then realized in its final finished material to be tested for surface qualities, for aesthetics, for performance, technical functionality, all of those different kinds of things. As the architecture practice grew, we're about a little more than 7 years old now. As that grew, we started realizing that we had a collection of these pieces of furniture that I'd mentioned, lights, objects for homes, things that we'd use in various projects. And once that got to a certain scale, we sort of thought about the idea of sharing that with a broader audience. You can see the kind of range of materials. We work with brass, we work with timber. This is recycled glass, different colored bottles that we've collected from recycling centers here in Mumbai. A little bit of leather, stone here on the top that I'll mention in a bit. And sort of different kinds of functions, things that people most likely would have in their homes, but a few of them have been developed for commercial projects as well. And so for me, again, the idea of the materiality, the richness of and the range and the diversity of materials that are available here in India, and not just the materials themselves, but the knowledge and the skill, the tacit knowledge that the artisans have in working with those materials and sort of bringing them to life is something that's really inspiring for us. This was a very early project that we did in the practice. I've been in touch with some publishers actually in Dubai, and they wanted this massive stone table, 6 meters long. And so we started looking at these marble slabs. How could we sort of break it down? How could we ship it? I liked the idea that the space you actually arrive at, so this is on the top floor of their office space, and you actually arrive into the space below the table. And so part of the design was understanding what the underside of that would look like, what it would feel like, and looking at sort of temple architecture. There's actually a reference image from Hampi that I had taken that this idea of these kind of repetitive columns, simple beams, and then these slabs kind of forming the roof, or in this case, the surface of the table. But again, the kind of simplicity, this whole thing comes apart at flat packs. It was shipped in a shipping crate and sort of then put together on site without any screws, nails. It's all just these very simple wooden pins. Again, working with material in different forms with different kinds of connections. This is a combination. One of the things that we focus on is this notion of contemporary craft. And while we do have all of the, part of this was the brass and part of the stone were CNC machined, but then there are certain parts of it that were very, very carefully and delicately the edges are hand rounded, they're finished, they're polished. And so for us, that notion of combining, we have all of the technology here in Mumbai, CNC plasma cutting and water jet and routering and all these kinds of mechanized things exist. But at the same time, we can build things the same way that it was done 2,000-3,000 years ago. And that tradition, that oral tradition of craft and tacit knowledge has carried on. This is another piece in stone that we've done. We just very simply call it a 3-cylinder table. We're looking at the kind of notion of, again, we like things that we can, this notion of Lego blocks or things that you can stack and rearrange. And these are just literally, there's no pins, there's no connection, it's all just self-weight. It's a fairly significant amount of weight, but the idea that you could have these 3 discrete elements, and simply by changing their proportion, you get this coffee table that we've used in a number of our projects and kind of found its way into our case goods collection as well. Transitioning, looking at how these things kind of translate to the scale of architecture. This is, many of you have probably seen this before, but this is a residential school for young women that we've done in Pune. It's for an NGO called Ar.Samuel. And it's a campus of, there's now a few more buildings. This is 3 of the 6 in total, but it's a residential campus for about 500, 600 young women. They come from, as I mentioned, it's based in Pune, so they're sort of young women who are sort of overachieving in their current classroom environments, and this is all completely scholarship funded. So it's helping people who are helping these young women who might not otherwise have the opportunity to go to a school of this level. And again, that idea of engagement, of collaboration, interacting not just with the local artisans and craftspeople, but in this case, this is a visual artist from Copenhagen. Her name is Milena Bach. And we worked with her to develop all of these colors, or actually she worked with us. This is all her doing in collaboration with not just the artisans and craftspeople that were doing the work, but also people in our studio and people from the community. And one of the things I love about this image in particular is you can see the level of active engagement. She's there, with her gloves on, standing on the scaffolding, not just understanding the material and the texture and the surfaces and the finishes and the colors for herself, but working actively with the people who would actually be executing the work at a larger scale to help them and share with them. There's obviously a language barrier between the two of them, but there's a mutual, they both speak the language of material and they both speak the language of craft, and they were able to sort of develop all of these, I'll call them colors, but at the end of the day, for us, it's a material. The paint has a kind of density, a thickness that kind of takes this otherwise bare concrete and transforms it into something much richer. Coming back to stone, one of the things that we did in the school, this was for an incredibly tight budget. So one of the things that we worked very hard to achieve was coming in not just at budget, but under budget. And so one of the ways we were able to do that was by using a lot of recycled materials or reclaimed materials, salvage pieces, things from quarries, things from stone yards, broken pieces that weren't sellable anymore. We could get them basically for the cost of transportation. And by using a little bit extra effort, obviously the labor costs would be a little bit more. But if you're able to get the materials for free, that ends up, or nearly for free, that ends up as a sort of net positive. And for us, that enabled us to sort of have these different, again, we worked with Milena, we worked with Dwani from our studio, and that enabled us to sort of have these different expressions in different spaces, whether they were public, private, academic, residential, and to sort of develop these very unique ensembles of space that were then coordinated with the doors, the windows, the ceilings, all of these different conditions. We took that same principle and applied it to the outdoor spaces. So some of you might recognize this is a photograph of the work that Pekionis did, the Greek architect, on the steps of the Acropolis. And what I love about that notion is that I was able to share this image with Rameshwar, who's the sort of contractor or head craftsman that we were engaged with, and to be able to share that with him, and just through dialogue, just through conversation, making samples. There are no drawings that exist for this paving. I don't know if you know Pekionis, but his work, he made meticulous drawings, very beautiful, but almost every single stone was laid out through his pen or through his pencil. And for us, that became it was much more seamless and much more natural to be able to work through just through dialogue and through mock-up and through teaching and through sharing, and to hearing feedback from the artisans who are doing it, to understand, is there an easier way to do it? Is there a more efficient way to do it? Is there a more practical way to do it? And that sort of close-knit feedback loop became really productive, and sort of we're quite proud of the results of it as well. Again, these are salvage pieces. Every different color, every different texture, every different surface almost comes from a different part of India or a different part of Gujarat or Rajasthan. And so there's a great story that the mason tells, especially that Rameshwar tells about the sourcing of it, is that you'd get the pink from this village, and you'd get the yellow from near Jaisalmer, and you'd get the green from these other places. And so it kind of immediately, in a place that's a brand new space and a brand new institution, it becomes this almost jumpstart to this this kind of visual and cultural heritage. Another important thing that we realized with stone was that we knew that there was a lot of furniture, there was a lot of storage, there were a lot of places in the building where we had to accommodate different functions, and we had always imagined, oh, we'll put up the walls, we'll make the building, and we'll then put, you know, we'll add lockers and we'll add storage spaces for bags and things like that as loose furniture in front of them. And we very quickly, working with the project manager, crunched the numbers, and we found that we could actually use slabs, like 40 millimeter thick slabs of marble instead of plywood. And they would be not only more cost effective, but they would be longer lasting, more beautiful, more hygienic, easier to clean, very little maintenance. And they could occur within the thickness of the wall. They could actually form the base of the wall, as opposed to having something that took up space in front of it, became clutter in the passage, those kinds of things. And so just through this very, very careful kind of rate analysis or value engineering part of the process, we were able to sort of work hand in hand, not just with the artisans, but with the project management team, to kind of understand where there were opportunities or gaps in these systems. And so this is the result of that. The block work was donated. It's actually recycled fly ash. They're lightweight blocks like Ceparex, but they use recycled fly ash. There's a sort of environmental impact benefit as well. Obviously, the stone, you can see, kind of speaks for itself. The flooring is the paving in the distance, and then you can see a little hint of the mosaic. You can see this was the project we developed the recycled glass tables for. Even the bench this here has threads that are made from, so the weaving on the backrest for the bench came from threads that were recycled industrial waste from textile mills, where we're taking those threads. It's kind of a rainbow of colors, and you get what they have, and by the time you sort of weave it all together, it becomes this kind of very vibrant tone. An important part of the space too, again, we're looking at the materiality and all of those functions, how the colors impact, how the stone impacts. But one of the things that became an important part, not just of the short-term health of the school, but the long-term, is we wanted to sort of limit our energy consumption. So we worked with Transolar, who's a climate engineer they have offices in Germany and in New York. And we worked with an engineer named Pratik Raval, who's obviously of Indian origin, but he was based in the New York office. And one of the things that we developed with him was this idea of a passive cooling system using solar chimneys and earth ducts. So effectively, the way that works is that you have these kind of glass greenhouses on the top that are vented at the very peak. They heat up a slab behind them that creates a convection that pulls air out of this vertical shaft that connects to the classrooms below and the dormitories above. And that convection, obviously, you're pulling out the hot air at the ceiling level of each, but in order to sort of have a fresh air supply without any mechanical systems, we put in these series of earth ducts underneath, these large concrete hume pipes that are facing the north side of the building. We planted vegetation there to sort of increase the humidity a bit. And so as the hot air is evacuating through the ceiling level, fresh air is coming in through these benches that were built into the base of the walls. It's coming in through open windows, open doors. And so not only did we have the verandas on the sunny side to kind of have deep recesses for the enclosed, but on the shaded sides, where you were more able to open your windows and bring in cool air, we had this passive cooling system. And what's important about that in relationship to what we're talking about today is that if I go back a couple of slides here, it required us to have fully exposed ceilings. If we put in a false ceiling, or if we put in a floor, like a some kind of a parquet floor or any kind of carpeting, it meant that the thermal qualities of the building materials wouldn't function in the way, because Pune has, in this particular valley, has a significant change between the daytime temperatures and the nighttime temperatures. The passive cooling system there would be a full air change within the space, several air changes between sunset and sunrise. And that enabled obviously the air to change, but it also enabled the ceiling, which was exposed, and the floor, which was exposed. The thermal mass of those two slabs could then be cooled and work as a kind of negative battery for the next day. And over the course of the day, through the ambient temperature of the air, it was being heated obviously by the sun, but also by the student occupying the space. The building itself could then absorb those temperatures and release that during the night. So Pratik worked with us very carefully. He did meticulous calculations throughout the year, every time of day, to understand those qualities. And so while, if you remember the first imagery, had these kind of sculptural elements on the roof, this one is a water tank, but this is the solar chimney. They're not just kind of this sculptural landscape that populates the rooftops, but they're also these very, very practical elements. And because we had this passive cooling system and we're able to use very simple LED tubes, simple ceiling fans, just with solar panels on the rooftops, we're able to produce more than 85% of the building's energy requirements just from those solar cells on the rooftop. So they're not net zero buildings, but they're very, very close. Another project, again, coming back to this notion of building with stone. This is a project we're doing that we did actually in Zanzibar. And one of the interesting things for us was that the geology of this place was extremely different from anything I'd ever encountered. The entire island is effectively a sort of a calcified coral limestone. So, over thousands and thousands of years, this coral accumulation has calcified. It's become this, you can see here, this cliff is effectively a monolithic, it's cantilevered, so it's undercut by the waves, and all of these sort of very rough blocks, and in some places quite porous pieces of stone are effectively a kind of limestone. Again, we worked with local knowledge and skill. This is Simona, an architect that had been working with us, but the craftsmen and artisans who are able to do this part. So very simple, again, concrete frame structure, local engineering, local technology, and then the workers themselves had the skill and the knowledge to apply this kind of cladding system. It's come basically from neighboring villages. You can see in the distance there's sort of two tones that you get. One is this kind of pinky, salmony, very beautiful color, and there's another version that you'll see in a minute that's a sort of more of a creamy kind of white. Again, tried to keep the forms very simple and functional. The use of verandas to provide shaded spaces, but also one of the functions for this project was to have the social spaces and interaction. It's a collection of guest houses, primarily built for two very good friends who had grown up together in Dubai. And they wanted to create a space where they could come with their friends and their family, but they also knew that they would only be there for at most a couple months out of the year. So they wanted to rent it out as a kind of collection of guest houses with a focus on obviously a connection to nature, but also this kind of social interaction. So looking at a very kind of village typology kind of situation where you have these verandas where people would feel comfortable sitting out in the evening. In addition to working with the local masons who are, you can see, working on the edge of the pool. So they were doing the kind of the white coral stone. We did bring, for this project, we did bring some stone from South India. This is a granite from the south. A funny story on this one was one of the other stones that we had used, which I think, do I have that image? Yeah, I don't see it here, but we had used a stone called Hassan Green, and without thinking, I asked Rameshwar, the same mason who worked with on Ar.Samuel, why it was. I actually asked him where it was from, and he looked at me sideways, asking, like, trying to figure out if I was joking or serious. And finally, he just said, "It's from Hassan," which was a little embarrassing. But I love that notion that again, going back to the colors at Ar.Samuel, that the material is somehow informed by not just the geology, but the place that it's from and the culture that it's from and the minerals and the soil where it's from. That has an impact on its history and its use and obviously the way in which it's implemented. We worked very closely with a landscape designer based in New Zealand, somebody that I've collaborated with, Andy Hamilton, on several other projects. But for actually implementing it, there was a local husband and wife team, Franco and Bernadette, who are, they're German, but they're based in Zanzibar, and they're actually permaculturalists. So worked a lot with native species. There was very little, the site itself was extremely barren. Everything was literally solid rock, what you saw in that first image. And so the notion of having to, it's also illegal to transport soil. So a lot of what we would do in terms of, in order to sort of propagate these plants, is we would put in fast-growing plants that could handle these very, very harsh conditions. They would then create biomass. We would then cut them down, compost them. One of the first things we built on site was the nursery itself. We would also get salvage materials again from a neighboring hotel would have a palm thatch roof that they would call makuti. And again, when it was time for them to change their roof, we would collect that material that would go into the compost bin. We had a shredder on site. This was the chicken house that Franco is very, this is Franco here, and this is Shehab, the client. But Franco is very proud of the chicken house because the chickens would aid in the compost. So they would consume waste from the kitchen. When the waste material generated by the chickens themselves would then be nitrogen-rich fertilizer that would get mixed in with the sort of plant material that we would have. And over time, we were able to sort of generate this landscape just through these very passive means. But by starting that process from the very beginning, even before we started the design work, we were already sort of implementing this kind of permaculture practice. That brings me to this project, which is actually a house for Franco and Bernadette. We call this the house to collect water. They have a small piece of land, I think just about not even 1 acre, but you can see very close to the ocean. They live themselves in a very passive lifestyle. They're out in the landscape and out in the gardens a good part of every day. They're working for a developer there who's building one of the largest sustainable residential developments in Africa. He's also a German developer, but the community is called Fumba Town. And at the very far end of the property, they have this little piece of land, and we wanted to build, they asked us to design a house for them. And so we started looking at, again, local context. This was what I was mentioning before, this idea, this is a house in the village, but this notion of a barasa, or a place to sit out and sort of speak or socialize with your neighbors. And as well, the climate was incredibly suitable for this courtyard typology. And so one of the things we decided very early on was that we wanted to build it completely without using any cement at all. And so we started doing research into lime, lime construction, lime plaster, limestone, lime mortar. And Zanzibar has this very rich tradition because it was this very, 200 years ago, there was no cement. Now it's kind of been, the country of the island's been polluted by obviously industrial processes, but you still find craftspeople and suppliers who are able to produce. This is a very local, very simple lime kiln. And the advantage of lime is twofold. One is that it burns at a much lower temperature, so it produces much, much less air pollution than industrial cement production does. And the other is that lime actually gets harder over time as it cures over years and decades. It wants to sort of calcify and harden, whereas cement will deteriorate after about 60, 70 years. And so for all of those reasons, we really love the notion. There are places where you can get, these are solid limestone blocks that are literally just cut out of the land. This is you can see it's kind of the edge of a quarry, but it's very shallow, so it's right basically at the surface. And it's cut very similar to laterite, for those of you who know how that's done, where you literally just kind of cut rows into the ground, and then you can pop them off with very simple tools. But again, what we loved about that notion, you can see the plan here, is that the site, if you remember the aerial photograph, is basically just this solid monolithic mass of calcified limestone. And by taking that very same material, cut it out in blocks, turning it into a putty or a paste, we could then make mortar from that. We could then make plaster from that. And then by simply changing its kind of its state, we could then make it malleable. We could stack them with the mortar. We could then plaster the walls, and then as that material of the plaster and the mortar interacted with just the air, with oxygen, it absorbs carbon dioxide. It would then calcify and become monolithic again. So its natural tendency, after you've sort of put it through these processes, is to go back to its solid form. And so that at the end of this, again, these are some of the courtyard images, but at the end of this, the walls and the foundations and the earth that it was resting on would all become one single monolithic entity. And our sort of move then, or the gesture for the architecture, was to put this sort of funnel-shaped topi, or this hat on top of it, where the water would collect in the courtyard. And again, because of their ambitions to be environmentally self-sufficient, the water heater is solar, just comes from solar radiation. The electricity, with very minimal photovoltaic cells, we're able to produce all of the electricity that's required for the house. And because of the rain cycle in Zanzibar, which is quite different from India, where we have these 4-month monsoons, there they get a more even disbursement. So we did very, very careful calculations in terms of water consumption, in terms of annual and monthly rainfall. And we designed this underground cistern that could act as a collection tank for the water coming off of the roof. So if you remember the plan, all of these roof surfaces are very carefully calculated. All of that water collects here in a water body. It's initially filtered, and it's then goes into the cistern. And what Bernadette especially loved, but Franco as well, was the notion that you could gauge the health and the well-being of the house by this water body that existed in the center, the plants, the fish, the things that were sort of living in that. And in order to ensure that the house was kind of happy and healthy, had water, had all of those kinds of things, that you had this kind of this visual expression, or this visual representation of that well-being. yeah, so this is one last view of that. So we're planning to start the construction for this now. It's been a couple of years, but they got sidetracked with COVID as well. And then the last project I wanted to show you, again, just to look at things across different scales, was we've been asked by one of the professional football teams in India. Goa has this amazing tradition of football and tying back to Portugal and Europe. And we've been asked to design a kind of master plan and hopefully eventually the architecture for a sports campus. The idea of having these fields and training facilities that integrated too with an international school where students who are coming to sort of practice a particular sport would also have the integration of education. And what we really loved about it as well was that the client was incredibly passionate about the sustainability of this endeavor, but also the idea of integrating landscape, passive cooling, nutrition, health, wellness, science, medicine, all of these different things coming together on this one campus. And so again, starting with permaculture practices, things that we learned from Franco and Bernadette, but also with Andy that we worked with from New Zealand. We started looking at the relationship between the fields, between the residences, the academic spaces, the sports, the athletic spaces, trying to understand how all of these wholes would, or how all of these parts would come to form a whole. Looking too at, things, rainwater harvesting. One of the things we were able to achieve at Apsara was the 100% of the irrigation required for the landscape was achieved through post filtration kind of recycling. And so the water that was going down the drains and the showers, sinks, even the toilets was able to go through. We had a sort of traditional septic tank that then overflowed into a reed bed filtration system that then went to a polishing pond. That polishing pond, through additional UV filtration, through certain kinds of species of fish and animals, would further be filtered, and then that could be redistributed throughout the landscape for irrigation and propagation of not just the sort of ornamental landscape, but also the very practical agricultural spaces as well. You could take gray water and use it in a much more direct kind of way, but looking at how we consider all of these holistically. And then again, coming back to this notion of stone, we did a series of, we worked with Put Your Hands Together, which is a local architect also based here in Mumbai. We kind of engaged them to collaborate with us on a kind of research exercise to understand. They had done some work in Goa. They do a lot of work with natural materials as well. But how we could work with laterite in various forms. So obviously you could use it in a standard block form. We looked at using it as a kind of additive to form concrete, where we could reduce the amount of cement that we would use. Obviously gabions are interesting and exciting for kind of these landscape element walls. It also becomes a very beautiful material to use as a kind of additive in rammed earth. And then how those things could be used at various places for various purposes throughout the site, and how that would, again, impact the water table. The entire site that we were on is basically, again, there is some amount of forest on it, but it's largely made from laterite. So again, similar to what we did in Zanzibar, if we can take the material that is already there on the site and just through a very balanced kind of cut and fill calculation, create rainwater harvesting tanks, create flat fields for the football pitches, create bleacher seating for spectators, and sort of look at that experiment holistically. We wanted to create this campus that kind of imagined or reimagined all of those elements in a way that was fully integrated to the best of our abilities. Again, taking a lot of the principles from Apsara, implementing solar chimneys, the diurnal temperature change. It's not too far from the ocean. And so It has a little bit less of a variation than Apsara does in terms of the temperature during the day and what it was at night. But looking at how you then adapt that model, again, through careful calculations and modeling to work within the system. And then obviously, like we do in any project, trying to integrate craft and materials and local building technologies, people, all of the kind of social and practical implications that those engagements have, was something that we were, excited about and passionate about. This project is kind of in the master planning stage, and that's another casualty of the pandemic. But we hope that as it becomes safer to do so, and as the economy kind of gets back on track, we're still in touch with the client for this, and they assure us that this will happen one day. So yeah, and again, the integration of landscape for nutrition, for well-being, for the production of food, these kind of biospaces where you can go in producing areas that are specifically oxygen-rich, using plants that are oxygen-rich producers that can be integrated then into the science and the sports medicine, is something that we looked at as well. And yeah, that's the extent of what I had to share. Be happy to take any questions if people have them.
Wonderful.
Hello. Yeah, first of all, we would like to thank you for this really amazing talk. One thing which I really found is that you have actually covered a lot of different kinds of stone, like spread over different kinds of geography. And I think, but there was one factor in common with all of these. So it is the collaborative nature of practice with the local craft. So which I think is like is amazing takeaway from your presentation. So now I would like to open the forum for any questions which.
I have a lot of comments. It's not just questions. And I would like to know, Samuel, are you there? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, what is amazing is the kind of practice you do in India. And it's really fascinating. And I could imagine that your practice is actually one of exploration, experimentation, innovation, and also learning from what you see. And there is so much to see and learn from in India, in an Indian setup, Indian environment. So, and you have one thing that you said right in the beginning, that your office is actually not unlike a typical architect's office. It is half of the space is devoted, maybe resources are also, or more than half resources are devoted to workshop. So it's a kind of a, and when half of the office is a workshop, a lot of experimentation takes place and a lot of innovation takes place, and then you can full scale mock-up can also be made, and you can also try and learn before you actually, I mean, the design process can be completely taken up till you can finalize until you know for sure that it's something is perfect. And you can do a lot of experimentation with that. Now, so how has it helped you? And what materials you actually use in your workshop? Or is it only confined to stone, or you also, the workshop is used for wood, for example, or paint, or any other material? No, this is a composite materials. How do you use this workshop space in your studio?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, it's about 1,200 square feet, the workshop space, and we're in an industrial compound, sort of right behind the airport in Mumbai. And primarily what we have are actually is for metal work. We have metal lathes and milling machines. We've got a little bit of woodworking material, but we've we've got this great space out back that's kind of just the porch extends, and that's where we do we make a lot of messes back there. We're doing some line research for some product design right now. But we also work with, there's 2 different carpentry groups that we engage with based in Alibag. There's most of the stone work that we do is stuff that happens on site, whether it's marble or terrazzo or even the plasters and things like that. And so there's the site itself is always a bit messy that way. But yeah, a lot of our workshop, relatively to what I would love it to be, is quite small. But we always, for the product design things, the pieces come there, we check them, review them, pack them, and then ship them out. And then we do a lot of model making, sort of prototyping of the smaller pieces. But it's primarily wood and metal in the workshop.
And then along with this is also connected with workshop only. You said, you mentioned something about use of machinery, mechanized tools, so power tools, as well as the use of hand, or other tools, instruments which the craftspersons use, the simple tools. So it's how do you decide which tool for what purpose, and when do you find which is more economical or faster to do? So what kind of thought process goes on in that? How do you decide on that tool?
I had an amazing teacher in architecture school who he liked to say, "Don't try to kill birds with bazookas." And so what he meant by that was, let's try and find the appropriate means to accomplish the goal that you're setting out for. Sometimes that decision is made based on what material we want to work with. Sometimes it's based on what form we want to achieve, based on who the people are that are involved, either the clients or the craftsperson themselves. We try to be efficient, and so we don't want somebody who's doing handwork for the sake of doing handwork, when a machine that's available across the street could do it faster and better. But we also know that there are many things that machines cannot do that these skilled artisans that we work with are just going to be better at. They're going to achieve finishes that no machine could produce. And so we really try and find the most relevant or appropriate solution for whatever it is the design goal is. And that changes from project to project and piece to piece.
Okay, I have 2 more questions, small, shorter ones. Because India has a large variety of stones, and that's available, but unfortunately around Mumbai there isn't much. You have to go beyond Mumbai to see a quarry or where stone is naturally available. So in stone quarries, for example, you have been dealing with marble, you have dealt with laterite, you have dealt with granite, and there are so many other varieties, sandstone. And so do you actually visit a stone quarry to select what kind of stone for your purpose? And then there is also connected to that is you use what you call quarry waste in your project, which doesn't cost much, or only except the cost of transportation, which you have used in floor mosaic. So that requires a visit to the quarry, or visit you make do with whatever is available within Mumbai.
So it's a mix. I love going to the quarries. I love going to places where materials are being collected or gathered. Some of the photographs of the image of the gentleman touching these giant slabs or these giant blocks of marble was a picture that I took. I was there with a client to select their flooring. I go whenever I can. Unfortunately, time doesn't always permit, either my time or the project schedule more often. But we have, again, 15-year, I've been practicing here 15 years. I have amazing relationships with the artisans and craftspeople and the suppliers who gather these things. And I really rely on their understanding and their knowledge, whether it's pictures on WhatsApp or conversations in my terrible, terrible Hindi. But it's about that engagement and about building that relationship of understanding and trust. We're working on a couple of products now, and we're actually building a house in Alibag as well. You'd mentioned Mumbai, or I would extend it to Maharashtra. Mumbai is full of black basalt. And so the roads that used to be, when the British paved the roads, it was all these massive chunks of black basalt. You can still get that as reclaimed material. But even if you just go out, if you go up to Borivali, the entire hill is made of black basalt. Not that you can quarry it, but the house that we're building in Alibag, the view to the mountain beyond, that mountain is black basalt, and we're using that material to build that house. And so similar thing in Kamshed as well. And so wherever possible, we prefer to use local materials, whether that's the timber or the stone or whatever it is. But, when we need marble, Rajasthan isn't so far away. We're never trying to import that from Brazil or from Turkey or from anywhere further afield.
Okay. That's all, because my last question was related to use of site materials, whatever that you have answered, like that. You look for first what resources are there, what materials are available in and around the site, so that you have answered that. That is what you're.
Yeah, and at Avsara, the goal has been, if you notice at the school, the goal has been to actually grow the bamboo that we need for the screens, to grow that material on site. So even if it's not there initially, if there are ways that we can, because those would have to be replaced every 10 or 12 years or so, if we can either find, especially in product design, like the supply chain becomes really, really important. And that's true of architecture as well. And so wherever we can, the closer the tree grows to where it's going to be made into a door or a window, that's better for us. We're always happy to have that part of the process.
Thank you so much, Mr. Barclay. Yeah,
my pleasure.
So far now, yeah.
I have some observations, Samuel.
Sure.
Especially because there are students who are attending this webinar, and I'm very happy that you so emphatically put that it's so important to have a workshop culture and work hands-on and just not be dependent on the softwares and simulations, but a healthy combination of both. So what I really want to appreciate is this entire value chain that you take into consideration while working on the project. So, procuring stone, timber, or any other material, and then working on it, involving the local stakeholders all the way up to transporting the final product or executing the project on the site. So what could be interesting for the students would be to know what is your process of building this ecosystem, because we do not have a readily available database, of course, where you could have the directory of craftspersons and quarries, although few of us are doing little efforts in that direction. So we do have some directories, like probably Nikhil is going to talk about it regarding the stone artisans, and we do have certain database regarding the crafts of different states. But what is your process of building this ecosystem and involving these stakeholders in a project?
First of all, if you come across the database, please share it with me. I would be desperate to get my hands on such a thing. I think it's just kind of beating the bushes and looking around and being open and receptive to that thing. One of the first things we do on any project, especially if it's in a far off place like Zanzibar, or we've done work in Dubai, and other places, is kind of going around and looking very carefully to the extent that it exists at the vernacular architecture, and understanding why things were made in a particular way, Why was a veranda placed that way? What about the chajja? Why did they use this material? And understanding what was, when the means and the resources to get things from other places didn't exist, what did people in that place do, and how did they do it? And so as soon as you start to look for those clues and put those things together, you'll understand sort of, there's a natural ease of means. And sometimes it's actually a process of kind of recreating an infrastructure that may have existed but doesn't anymore, or has diminished now, and really trying to find a good, whether it's a tour guide, whether that's the client, whether that's a young mason or a local architect, or somebody who can kind of give you, you just need like a little crease that you can sort of open up and stick your head through, and then this whole world opens up. And so it's really important to be receptive to that, I think anyway, and to kind of follow those clues and look for those kinds of moments. And again, it might be a material, it might be a particular skill set, it might be it might even be an industrial process. It's really hard to say, but again, we try and choose something that's appropriate and relevant to all of the different factors that go into the aspirations of the client, and mixed with ours as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you encourage that kind of collaborations, like permaculturist and nutrition, food, and bringing a holistic picture. And I'm very glad that you reiterated it. And I'm sure students are taking cues, because they're always asking that vernacular ends up with theory classes or just in rural India, and it doesn't reaches the contemporary part. But the way you have talked about the tradition and continuity, and we see the contemporary expressions of how the material stone has been, highlighted through your projects, whether it's Zanzibar or in Pune. So that's fascinating. So in fact, I would really like to request you to, collaborate with us in the building inventories that we are creating as an outcome of this project. Maybe Axel would like to talk a little bit about those.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, Samuel. I'm Barim
thank
here.
you. Thank you. Sorry?
I'm Barim this side. I have a small question. Can I proceed? Are you hearing me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My background is machine tool engineering, and currently I'm associated with water jet cutting, which is used in architecture. But whatever the presentation I saw, yours is really excellent, and it is more of it's a human skill, using the earthen materials and creating different kind of ecosystems, and it is really appreciable. My only one question is that about the productivity, about that project, how you make it in a shorter time, how you can replicate, how it could be taken into a broader scales. That's what is my question.
Sure, that's very fair. And I think we've done some projects. We've done a residential interior from the day they started breaking to the day they moved in was 3 months. I know that's not the scale of a massive campus or anything, but I think for us, we try to find, again, the appropriate solutions that respond to all of the qualities and the forces that are acting on whatever it is we have to achieve. So those things are the schedule, they're the budget, it's gravity, it's the program, it's the wishes of the client, it's what it looks like, it's how it works, it's the climate, it's all of these. There's an infinite list of characteristics, and then part of our job is to arrange those into a sort of a meaningful hierarchy. And so there's the old contractor's joke where you can pick the schedule, you can pick the budget, or you can pick quality, and you have to choose 2 out of 3. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think it's important to understand that if I'm making my decisions in a way where the schedule is the first and foremost thing, that will have a certain outcome. And if I make my choices based on quality, that'll have a different outcome. And if I choose based on the budget, that'll have a third outcome. So how I prioritize those, we've worked on projects where it had to be done in a particular timeline, and we've achieved that goal. And that meant that we had to choose, you know, the more carpentry you have in Mumbai anyway, the more carpentry you have, the more expensive it is, and the longer it takes. And so that means that we're going with more of masonry finishes and things like that. And so everything we do has to consider those things. I would like to think that I can work with a project manager, and we have worked with project managers in the same way that we work with a master mason or a carpenter or a weaver. And so they're another craftsperson, as far as I'm concerned, who is providing meaningful input and useful information to help inform our design process.
Great. Yeah, I understand. In fact, I came across few of Alibaug factories where they really do this kind of a projects. Only thing is that those are very few projects, limited projects. How it could be multiplied with your skill, deputing or integrating with some companies, so that this kind of a great thing can be done more in numbers.
Sure.
Possibly.
I think the limitation, unfortunately, is that massive projects tend to be first driven by the budget, then they tend to second be driven by the schedule, which impacts the budget, and then quality is something that's considered and people do the best they can. It's rarely one of the top two in that of those three. And where we have kind of visionary developers or visionary clients or people who are making decision makers, be they politicians or whoever, the more people are pushing. And I don't mean quality in terms of, it doesn't have to be expensive. Avsara was built for 2,400 rupees a square foot, from foundations all the way through the furniture. So it wasn't, in my view anyway, the quality has not been compromised. But we have to sort of have that insistence on something qualitative, however that's defined.
Good. Understand. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Samuel, for your talk and your presentation. I really appreciated it a lot. And when you came to Aachen, I was particularly fascinated by, you know, your own tradition of investing workshop spaces. So my question goes a bit into the learning, the workshop space as a space of learning and training. In many countries, and especially Germany, we encounter a drastic shortage of people who are sufficiently skilled, you know, the high-ranking artisans. And I don't know exactly the situation in India. Do you consider the workshop space as a possibility for learning and training? And is that a survival kit for, you know, to maintain this high level of craftsmanship for you?
Yeah, I think so. It's certainly not the only way, and I'm always very I always want to be very clear that this is the way that I've chosen to practice, we've chosen to practice. I'm always happy to sort of accumulate like-minded people and people who share our values, maybe more importantly. But you know, the carpenters we work with come from 60 generations, a kind of lineage of their fathers' were all carpenters. They start training when they're 14 years old. It's an 8-year apprenticeship. You know, the first year, all they're doing is sharpening blades and getting tea, and that's it. And so that's partly where this notion of tacit knowledge comes from as well, in that it's this sort of shared verbal tradition, or an oral history of, not even a history, but an oral tradition where you're passing this down and you're learning through mentoring and that kind of process. You know, I think part of being if you take that then to the design world, I think part of being a good designer is having a kind of healthy curiosity. For me, that's always been very much about how things are made or produced or how they work. And so I was always like taking things apart or trying to modify them and work on them in different ways. And so that's, again, I feel like that has contributed to the fact that I studied structural engineering but never practiced it. I know just enough to get me in trouble. I'm able to engage with an engineer using his vocabulary, his or her vocabulary, using their terms, and that I can understand at a very basic level. And the same is true. I know just enough about woodworking, but I'm not a master woodworker. I know how to weld, but I'm not an amazing machinist. And so again, for me, that workshop culture and the way that things are made by pursuing my curiosity and encouraging the people on our team to pursue that and to engage with it, what can be learned and what that can then translate into a design process, because I don't think it's one or the other. It's not making or design. As soon as those things become put into silos, then we're kind of in the mess that we're in, I think, in the world these days. As soon as, you know, the way that something is made doesn't consider how it's going to be disposed of or where the materials that make it come from, as soon as we lose sight of that, then we're in an environmental crisis, we're in a social crisis, we're having all of these kinds of issues that we're now facing. And I don't claim to be, I collaborate, and that's the notion of the craft of collaboration. Collaboration itself is a skill that takes years to learn, and I'm not there myself, but it's this thing that through engagement, I can, by being selfless about it and pulling in people who do have these skills, your work becomes better. And so this notion that we're this notion of authorship and the architect at the sort of top of the thing, and they give the instructions and wear the white hard hat and all of that, for me is nonsense. I'd rather have my sleeves rolled up and be talking to the mason, and even grabbing their tools and trying things out. And that's where the richness comes from for me. Again, that's our process.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So thank you, sir.